and welcome to the Slugger Politics Plus podcast. In this episode, we are looking at the State of the State report published by Deloitte, and we have two people behind this report, particularly focusing on the Northern Ireland section, Mr. Ed Roddis, who is the Head of Public Sector Research for Deloitte, and Marie Doyle, who is Deloitte's Northern Ireland Public Sector Director. Both of you are very welcome to the Slugger Politics Plus podcast.
Thanks for having us, David.
Okay, I want to start off with, there's so much to go through because you guys have been surveying kind of pandemic attitudes. You've been looking at how things go. So I just want to start off with Ed. For anyone who hasn't been looking at the State of the State report or doesn't totally know what it is, Ed, if you could just kick us off with a bit of a quick synopsis about what is the State of the State report and why do numbers nerds and policy nerds like me find it so fascinating?
Sure. So the State of the State is our attempt to create an annual snapshot of what's happening across government and public services across the whole of the UK, including in Northern Ireland. And what we do is bolt together two different bits of research. So on the quantitative side, we get Ipsos Mori to do a big survey for us, nice big sample size, so we can report with confidence on what's happening in Northern Ireland. That's a citizen survey about public attitudes to public spending and issues to do with the public sector. And then the other bit of research that we bolt into that is the qualitative side. And we get that by interviewing a whole bunch of public sector leaders, including people here in Northern Ireland, people like senior civil servants, police leaders, people in the NHS. Put those two things together, it gives us the State of the State.
Okay, and it's a fascinating snapshot, and you actually delve into the different regions and and different attitudes. Marie, obviously from a Northern Ireland perspective, it does give. We don't often get that kind of in-depth interviews with senior policymakers and business leaders and politicians as well. So from a Northern Ireland perspective, as you view it, how is the report generally received, and how do you find the report contributes to the wider, public policy debate that goes on in Northern Ireland?
So I think, David, the first thing I'd say is we get great buy-in and great support from public sector leaders and indeed leaders across business groups as well in Northern Ireland to State of the State in the interviews that we do. So every year we interview a wide cross-section of public sector and business leaders in Northern Ireland for State of the State, and indeed possibly a greater representation of those leaders than any other part of the UK in Northern Ireland. And we find that those interviews are very open interviews. I think those leaders enjoy the opportunity to reflect on the State of the State, if you like. And then when the findings come out, I do think again that the leaders and the teams and the management and staff who work in our public sector also really like the opportunity again to reflect around things like COVID and what the impact of COVID-19 has been on our public sector and future of work and digital transformation. What is our transformation priority? So I think really well received, and we're really grateful indeed for the contributions we get in Northern Ireland.
I think people find it cathartic, David, to have this conversation. It's amazing how many of the interviews we do and people say, "Oh, I feel much better after that." It's a good opportunity for people to share their take, and it's what gives the report its colour and its humanity, I think.
Yeah, because you guys, and you'll be able to, for anyone who's listening to this, in the bio at the bottom and on the post, you'll be able to click through and actually read the most recent edition of the report. You were talking about it being cathartic there, Ed. Obviously, you guys take snippets and quotes and put things up there in lights. And obviously, one of the things that we've been talking about and we've been focusing on over the last 19 months has been the COVID-19 pandemic. And, your report does highlight, obviously, Northern Ireland, public services are a big issue. And one thing that I did note that you guys picked out in the report was you talked about how the scale of the COVID-19 response has squeezed the public sector's bandwidth with countless consequences. And we're actually, as we record, seeing some of that happening within the health service, the education service, and other aspects of the public service. And you noted that there were pre-existing existing issues in the system that have not been addressed and transformation programs that have been shelved. So I want to ask you first, Marie, if you can kick us off with this. What are these challenges facing the public sector in Northern Ireland, and what are the main things on the to-do list in terms of transformation?
So I think you're right, David. COVID-19 has played havoc with normal public sector operations, no different in Northern Ireland as to anywhere else in the world. And I think really important to reflect, there was no rule book on managing COVID-19 and navigating COVID-19, and I think we need to reflect on that when we talk about how public sector has performed during the last 2 years or so. But you're right, we are in a fairly difficult space, and I think our interviews in Northern Ireland reflect and acknowledge that there is transformation priorities, there are issues across public sector in Northern Ireland that, to be fair, we've long known are in need of transformation. I think all of our interviewees talked to us this year about health transformation. And yes, I think you're absolutely right. COVID-19 just highlighted the structural issues in health. It isn't the only issue that's facing health. You know, we have a system that is probably one of the most funded systems, certainly in the UK, per head of population. But if we look at our waiting lists, for instance, I mean, they are the worst in the UK. So we're not getting the outcomes that we would expect to get for the type of health service we have. So there are structural issues, and I think that's well understood across our public sector. And I think we will see, and certainly the indicators we got from our interviews this year are that we will see a prioritisation of health transformation in the time ahead. We are hopeful, and our public sector leaders are hopeful, that we're going to get a multi-annual budget for the first time probably in 7 years now in Northern Ireland, and there will be a need to invest in and transform healthcare and indeed social care. And of course, we do have an integrated system in Northern Ireland. So in many ways, we should be able to do that more effectively than perhaps other parts of the UK. So I think health is absolutely a priority, and we're likely to see that maintained and reinforced as we go through, and certainly into the next the next local election. But there's others. You've touched on education, and in the week that we're having it, and the COVID pressures on our education system, you know, education reformation is a priority as well, and we heard that talked about. We heard about investment needed in our wastewater infrastructure, investment needed in digital transformation across the whole of the public sector. Indeed, transformation more fundamentally of the administration of public sector in Northern Ireland. We had public sector leaders talk to us about skills deficits, particularly around digital. You know, they're relying on too few people to do these transformation programs that need delivered. So no matter where you look or who you talk to, I think in public sector, there is an energy and an appetite to transform. I think the challenge will be, how do we fund that and how do we resource that going forward?
Yeah, and absolutely. And the policy agenda, I mean, Ed, it just seems to be getting, you know, bigger and bigger and bigger. I mean, for any of you keeping score, the executive currently has 17 bills to try and get passed before the end of March. No mean feat, but the policy issues do seem to be stacking up and up and up there, as Marie is talking about. What are you getting? Because the great thing about you, Ed, is that you do this research across the UK. So what is it you are seeing, particularly for Northern Ireland, that maybe is chiming on those, with COVID issues across the UK?
Well, do you know what you mentioned in your question to Marie about bandwidth, and that's a massive issue right now because the public sector's bandwidth is finite. And what we've seen in the interviews this year is that people are tired as well. So across the piece, across the public sector, not just the public sector, the private sector as well. We've had 21 months of this pandemic, and people in the public sector have been hard at it, firefighting, dealing with this thing, and they're pretty low at the minute, and that doesn't help deal with all the transformation things that have started to pick up. And I think there are a couple of specifics to add into here as well. I mean, Northern Ireland Civil Service, part of its transformation agenda is dealing with its ageing workforce. You know, they've got quite an old workforce in the Northern Ireland Civil Service. That's an issue. And then another part of it is how to seize the opportunities that are around at the moment. Because what fascinates me about the legacy of this pandemic is when we talked to people last summer, they were saying, the public sector, we've been more agile, we've been able to make decisions quicker, we've been able to surge forward on digital transformation because of the context we were operating in. This year, when we had those conversations, that context has changed a bit. I mean, the digital transformation has slowed down, and that sense of agility, it's kind of remaining, but there's been a snapback to kind of normal ways of operating as well. So part of the challenge across the public sector is, how do you lock in those new ways of working, those things that slight positive legacies to come out of this horrific pandemic? How do you lock in those new ways of working and treat them as an opportunity to come out of it? And that's something that we picked up in our interviews as well.
Yeah, and obviously, we often hear that term. It's probably been overdone as, build back better. Is the term. I know it's been largely co-opted by President Biden in the United States as well. But as we talk about building back better and new ideas and new initiatives, something that isn't a result of the pandemic, but was actually a creation of our New Decade, New Approach agreement, which helped restore the Assembly in January 2020, is things like initiatives like the Fiscal Council. And again, I note that your report does touch on, the interviewees have high hopes for it, and I note the Fiscal Council just recently published their first report. And again, Marie, if you can comment on this, there seems to be a hope that the Fiscal Council can almost be like our local Office for Budgetary Responsibility. So what are we hoping, and what have you detected that people are hoping that bodies like the Fiscal Council can achieve? And does Stormont need to spend the money it already gets better, or do we need a better conversation about revenue raising as we go into the next election?
Yeah, I mean, this is fascinating, David. And I looked at the recent report that the Fiscal Council has published, which reflected on the comprehensive spending review outcome in Westminster and what that might mean for Northern Ireland. I think the most exciting thing for Northern Ireland in this context, as we sit here today, is the potential of getting a multi-year budget next year. And I think it's even more exciting, if I can remain optimistic for a second, if they can agree that budget before they go into Purda, before the next Assembly election, because the dynamic of doing that is quite important. If they can agree that without understanding who's going to be minister, who's going to have what portfolios, then they could take a very joined up approach to that budget, rather than a self-interested approach to that budget setting process. And that could be really important and provide really a good foundation for the next Assembly, the next executive, if they can get that in place. And I understand, and we understand from the conversations we had, that is they've brought through a draft agenda. They want that, they've brought through a draft budget. They're going to bring that budget out to consultation and get a final budget agreed by the end of March. So I think if we're looking on the optimistic side of this, that could be really important for Northern Ireland. The role of the Fiscal Council is important, and actually I think great credit is due to them on their recent report. It's very clear around how financing and public spending works in Northern Ireland. But you do touch on an interesting conflict or dynamic that we have in Northern Ireland, which is government here spend £9 in every £10 spent in Northern Ireland, but they only have powers to raise £1 in every £20. So there's a real challenge, which is probably something for the Fiscal Commission, which is the second of the bodies that's been established, to think about around the fiscal powers of the local executive here in Northern Ireland. And, we did talk to indeed ministers and public servants about this. And there's a recognition at this point that there is not a political consensus on revenue raising. There just isn't. But there is also a recognition that if an independent Fiscal Council was to make such recommendations, and make such recommendations with evidence behind it, then it would force the political institution to think about those recommendations and to think very seriously about those recommendations. So all the indications we got from State of the State interviews in 2021 are that these are good for Northern Ireland. The Fiscal Council and the Fiscal Commission are good for Northern Ireland, and we should absolutely support them. And certainly the ministers we talked to indicated that they would support in due course the recommendations that come from them.
Brilliant. Okay, and Ed, obviously, this is a bit of a new beast, but you've witnessed, the impact that new creations, relatively new creations such as the Office for Budgetary Responsibility have had on the fiscal debate in the UK, but also interestingly, and Marie was touching on there about obviously the Fiscal Commission, which could recommend potentially new powers. Obviously the SNP government has in the past 2 years started experimenting with their tax raising powers that they've had for quite a while, but they've only recently started using them. So just if you could give a bit of a comment about what you think this could mean for the economic and fiscal debate for Northern Ireland.
Well, I totally agree with Marie. I think the Fiscal Commission in particular could be hugely significant, because if they get that right, what it's going to do is really surface the kind of choices available to the executive, and it's going to let politicians and the public look some of those choices square in the face. And then it's over to the politicians to make some very complex, difficult decisions, not decisions I would want to make in terms of across the piece, the revenue raising, how money is spent and allocated, the whole thing. And then, of course, it's up to the Assembly and the electorate to hold the executive to account on that. So I think it could be hugely significant. And these things are far better with some sunlight. You've called out the OBR. The level of debate across the public finances in the UK, in Westminster and Whitehall, is enormously richer for having the OBR.
Okay, and do you think that just to get your perspective on this, do you think that in terms of the revenue raising and in terms of some of the things there, did you pick up and if either of you want to comment on this, did you pick up much of an appetite, particularly amongst your business interviews and your more kind of civil service interviews? Did you pick up much of an appetite coming in for kind of those revenue raising powers and what some of those could potentially be?
So if I picked up an appetite, it was for decisions to be bold and decisions to be sustainable and decisions to be made in the long term and in the public interest, and not for things to be, cans to be kicked down the road. That was the appetite I picked up. And then, beyond that, I think it's up to a personal appetite, isn't it? Along a spectrum of how you feel about revenue raising and all that piece. But yeah, the appetite I picked up was really for boldness.
Yeah, I would agree, Ed. I mean, I think the only other point I'd add to that is collaboration, a real appetite for collaboration across sectors in driving some of this transformation on outcomes. We saw a glimmer of that in the last draft programme for government, where there was talk about collaboration across sectors to drive better outcomes for people. We didn't really see the reality of it. So I think getting a new programme for government and really seeing what can be done in terms of collaboration between private sector, community and voluntary sector and public sector, I think is going to be important.
Okay, I'm going to apologise for this question in advance, because it seems like you can't do any politics podcast if without mentioning the B word, or the P word as it's now become known in Northern Ireland. The protocol, Brexit, our relationship with the European Union vis-a-vis our relationship with the rest of the UK, and of course your report doesn't avoid it either. Your interviewees were noting that both the public and private sectors were excited by the longer term possibilities for Northern Ireland if the protocol leaves it in a unique position as a bridge between the EU and the UK market. So I just want to ask, Ed, I'll go for you first. What are the opportunities and the burdens, if there are from the protocol? And I did note, by the way, if the two of you could pick up on this as well, the report references new industries in areas like green jobs. So I'm just wondering, if the opportunities are there, how can we secure these?
Oh, I think all questions on Brexit are really for Marie and not me, David. That's the way I see it. But I'll give it a go.
Give it a go. Go on.
So we don't know right now where the protocol's going to land. But what came across in the interviews, in the people, both in the public and private sectors, is that people have become poised and focused on exploiting the opportunities for the benefit of Northern Ireland and are unapologetic about that. And I think that's a really encouraging attitude to hear. On those opportunities and where they could be, the green economy, net zero, green industry, green technology came up time and time again. And I think I pick up a sense that Belfast and Northern Ireland more widely, it's got the skills, the infrastructure, the lifestyle possibilities to attract talent. It's got the scale that means it can be fleet of foot. It's got leaders in the public and private sector that have become very adept at place shaping and dealing with issues like driving inward investment. So, I think it's all to play for. And that was really the sense that I picked up. People have moved away from where they were 5 years ago, thinking really and dwelling on the politics of Brexit. And in Northern Ireland, for me, they're really poised and focused on the opportunities.
Okay, Marie, your thoughts?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with what Ed has said there. I think we as part of State of the State, you mentioned, David, we conducted a survey with Ipsos Mori. One of the questions we asked in that survey was what you would want your region to be known for on the world stage. And we had a disproportionately higher number of people from Northern Ireland referencing that they wanted Northern Ireland to be known as a place to do business. So I think there is an entrepreneurial spirit in Northern Ireland that is distinct and unique, and we should absolutely build and capitalise on that. So, the conversations we had around the protocol, yes, there was certain interviewees who talked up the opportunity, and then there was other interviewees who dwelled on the significant constitutional issues and economic issues that we have around the protocol, particularly on east-west trade. And I think there is recognition that even though we moved beyond the EU exit on the 1st of January, the protocol has not been fully implemented in Northern Ireland, and we've been moving from grace period to grace period. And if there was to be a full implementation of the protocol as it sits now, that would be economically very challenging for east-west trade from Northern Ireland and from Northern Ireland to GB and vice versa. So I think there is a realistic view that there needs to be some kind of adoption of the protocol in terms of east-west trade. But if that can be adopted in a way that is practical and is workable, then there is absolutely an opportunity for Northern Ireland to have a foot in both the European market and the UK market. And I think, some of our businesses have already moved on that opportunity and are already seizing that opportunity. And I think we would see more of that. I think the most interesting thing for me as we sit here today on the protocol and Brexit is when we were conducting these interviews over the course of the summer, I really felt that by the time we would be coming to publish the State of the State report in late autumn, that things would have moved on drastically, and actually what we would have to say would be out of date. And it surprised me actually in the last couple of weeks that actually what we heard and what we were saying hadn't really moved on at all, despite all the bluster we hear day and daily in the media and on the airwaves about this. It's still pretty much reflective of the situation we find today. So we'll have to, it feels that we'll have to wait another period of time to maybe see what comes of that. In terms of green growth, we did talk a lot about green growth in this year, and that was, I think, a new dynamic. It was much more of a conversation point this year than it has been in previous years. All of the people we talked to acknowledged it is a priority for Northern Ireland. I think Department for Economy has identified it as one of 4 priority sectors it wants to focus on over the next number of years. Hydrogen has been talked about, and the opportunities perhaps along our sea borders in Northern Ireland. And then the skills point that Ed talked about as well, and building those green skills. I think the challenge for green growth is going to be investment and policy around it. We've currently 2 bills going through the Assembly on this. Where are we going to get consensus on our regional approach to net zero, and what are our policy initiatives going to be, and who owns and who's going to drive those policy initiatives? And I think there is going to need to be an upfront investment in net zero that'll have to be fueled and incentivised through public sector. And is there really going to be the bandwidth financially and otherwise to do that with everything else that's going on?
Yeah, absolutely, and and doing that from a devolved government too. But it is good that we've managed to actually keep a discussion about the protocol in a mostly optimistic, substantive policy discussion, which doesn't often happen in Northern Ireland. But let's take a look at another big issue. And quite often, our debate has really focused a lot on the protocol. Quite often, our debates are also very centred when it comes to public policy. When we tend to be very centred on health. And I just noticed that in your report, you're noting that the Northern Ireland public see social care and benefits payments as bigger priorities than anywhere else in the UK. They see policing as less of a priority than elsewhere. And I just wonder, and I want to throw this to Ed. I just wonder, do you think that maybe the focus on issues like health is maybe hurting Northern Ireland in other policy areas? I mean, Marie just spelled out there, some of the challenges there around green growth and economic development. I just wonder, is our focus on health maybe hurting the policy debate in other ways?
I don't necessarily think it's hurting the policy debate in other ways, but there's only so much cash to go around in the public sector. And health systems tend to have unquenchable thirsts. And I don't think across the UK we're very good at defining the limits of what our public health system can provide. And I think we've got some way to go as well on the whole preventative dimension, the demand management dimension, the public health dimension, getting out and talking to people about big issues like obesity and about diabetes, in the same way that government and the wider public sector has tackled things like smoking. I think there's still a long way to go before we manage demand down. So I don't necessarily think it's hurting the debate, but health spending is unquenchable.
Okay, and Marie, what's your thing? I mean, there are lots of people in the education sector point out. I mean, we've just talked about jobs and skills, yet our education budget is flatlining in Northern Ireland. I just wonder, in terms of the focus of the policy debate, have we got that right?
I totally agree with everything Ed said there in relation to health. I think if you look at the trajectory of health spend in Northern Ireland, we're poised to have to spend 80% of the block grant on health if we don't transform what we do. And I think there is a realisation and an acceptance that in order to transform, we're going to have a period of dual running and dual funding. And so there is going to be short-term pain financially to get us onto the right health trajectory and allow that to be financially sustainable in the long term. I do, and we did hear from some of our public sector leaders that there is concerns about what that will mean for funding across other departments and other sectors, and I think we'll see that playing out in the budget.
Yeah, okay, and obviously you both of you have referenced this. There are a lot of good initiatives out there, a lot of good ideas, a lot of good policy proposals, but the ability to actually deliver those falls to the executive. And yet your research has found, again, I don't want to end on a negative note, but we have to make mention of it, is that the Northern Ireland executive has the lowest confidence levels of any of the governmental institutions in the UK. So Ed, I'll kick off with you here on this. What can the executive do? Let's keep it constructive. What could the executive potentially do as we go into the next election and we start afresh again from May? What could the executive do to rebuild confidence?
Yeah, okay. So I wasn't really surprised by that finding that trust and confidence in Northern Ireland is lower than with the other administrations and with the UK government. And I think the public in Northern Ireland is still reeling from, 590 days without an executive. Now that is going to take a toll that is going to play out in survey results like this one. So I wasn't at all surprised to find that result. What can they do to build confidence? Well, you've said about the Assembly elections next year, David, and I think elections at their best can really draw a line under the past and help people move on. And if that election is a good election, and I would define that as one with constructive, positive debate rather than kind of tawdry partisan debate, I think that will be even more efficient and effective at drawing a line under that extended absence that the executive had. And I think some of the other things that could help shift the dial on trust is some stability as well. I mean, when the Northern Ireland Protocol sorted, when we start to feel like we're really in a post-Brexit era, we're really up and running, I think that will really help. And then I think as well, we've talked about the Fiscal Commission. If the executive starts to make those difficult choices that the public instinctively know it needs to make, then I think people will respect that, and I think trust will be built from that point.
Okay, you're ever the optimist.
Always,
about a substantive policy election for 5 weeks during April and May. I will come back to you at the end of May, and we'll see whether that happens. Marie, what can the executive do to build up that confidence?
Yeah, well, we'll have to keep it positive, David, won't we? So I think agreeing a multi-annual budget to give us some long-term financial stability around some of these policy initiatives, acting on the numerous strategies and recommendations that exist, particularly around health transformation, agreeing an outcomes-based programme for government and implementing that programme for government, and I suppose very fundamentally coming back after the next election and forming a government in Northern Ireland, because I think we heard there is some debate over whether indeed we will even get to that place. So there is uncertainty and there will be uncertain times ahead, but I really hope that we can get a positive outcome this time next year.
Yeah, well, hope springs eternal, and you know what, we do tend to pull things out of the fire in Northern Ireland at the very last minute. Ed, I just want one last question for you, if we can end on a positive note. Was there anything in the report? Obviously, this is the problem for anyone who's ever written reports. They have to have a start, a middle, and an end, and a word length. I just wonder, was there anything that you would love to have got in that you didn't get in, and that you could maybe tell us about now?
Ooh. That's a killer question. So, I mean, in a lot of the interviews, people talk about the politics, and then it boils down to a lot of individual views and some fairly extreme views at that. So there's plenty of political comment that we didn't really we didn't really have the bandwidth to include. And then also there's some good stuff as well about the future of work and hybrid working, remote working. And the one that sticks into my head was somebody really senior in the NHS who said, you know, I do my ironing during Teams calls. That's why I don't have the camera on. I think that was probably one of my favourite moments.
Brilliant. Okay, well, that's sure we've all been there as well. Folks, can I thank you very much for giving us your insights. Well done, and congratulations again on a really substantive report. Again, it's been something we've been covering on Slugger for the past few years. So congratulations to yourselves at Deloitte, and also Reform, who I know help you out with this report as well. So the State of the State report, you can read that online. You can click the link below this podcast here on the Slugger O'Toole website. Marie, Doyle and Ed Roddis, thank you very much for your thoughts and contributions today.
Brilliant. Thanks, David.
If you enjoyed listening to this podcast, please hit the subscribe button so you can keep up to date with all future episodes.